Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Friday, September 13th. I'm Jonathan Linden, in for Elizabeth Arkalian. Coming up, we hear from Hina Hadal, who is using her upbringing in the San Joaquin Valley to inform her medical education at Stanford University. Extreme weather, like the heat waves we experienced this summer, are impacting enough people that doctors are becoming what she calls climate-conscious physicians.
I think it's definitely not a trend. It's really becoming an integral movement within the medical community.
Hear more about the ways extreme weather can impact your health in just a few minutes. But first, today's headlines. The Kern County Sheriff's Office is facing criticism after the department's search and rescue team refused to fetch a submerged vehicle from the Kern River, citing safety concerns. The vehicle is believed to be connected to the case of a missing Ridgecrest nurse. Families say the woman's cell phone last pinged at a location near the river along Highway 178. The same family enlisted the help of a river diver who identifies himself as Jared. He's from a volunteer group called Adventures with Purpose. He recently criticized the sheriff's response in a YouTube video with more than 140,000 views.
I dove on the vehicle. It took me a whole 8 minutes to go down to the vehicle in that water, swim over to it in the eddy right there to the back of the vehicle, identify every window's blown out, the hood is up.
In a news release, the Kern County Sheriff's Office says it is waiting for water levels to decrease before retrieving the vehicle. The department says its investigation into the missing woman is ongoing and that they had recovered the sunken car's license plate. Fresno State announced it will lead the Mountain West Conference in 2026 and join the prestigious Pac-12 Conference. KVPR's Joshua Yeager reports not much is known about the transition, but that the university has high hopes.
The announcement comes more than a year after a mass exodus of teams from the Pac-12. UCLA, USC, Cal, and others departed primarily over broadcast rights disputes. But the Bulldogs' new athletics director, Garrett Classy, says Fresno State is up for the challenge in the new conference.
I know that some of the teams have left, but those that are coming in, it's our goal to compete and be as strong as the brands that are leaving.
3 other Mountain West teams are joining the Pac-12. In his announcement, Classy hinted at the potential benefits for Fresno State, including new media rights and corporate partnerships.
We're not going there for a participation trophy. We're going there to win championships.
The Pac-12 Conference currently has just 2 schools, Oregon and Washington State, in its ranks. Details over how Fresno State will transition out of Mountain West and what it may cost are not clear. For KVPR News, I'm Joshua Yeager.
The Kern County Planning Commission approved California's first carbon storage project late Thursday night. The 3-0 vote followed a marathon 4-hour-long meeting that was standing room only. Many attendees wore stickers reading, "I support carbon TerraVault." That's the name of the proposal to store up to 50 million tons of carbon dioxide underneath the Elk Hills oil field. Dozens of residents from nearby communities, meanwhile, held signs in Spanish that read, "Stop dangerous carbon capture." The project goes to the Board of Supervisors next month for final approval. 2 planning commissioners were absent from Thursday's vote. They had previously recused themselves due to conflicts of interest. The time has come for the public to finally get a glimpse of the new baby elephants at the Fresno Chaffee Zoo. Zoo officials announced Thursday that the calves have been introduced to the zoo's savanna. Starting today, the public will be able to view the elephants in their habitat between the hours of 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. Zoo officials warn that viewing opportunities will be dependent upon the animals and that they may be removed occasionally for animal care. The birth of the elephants made a big splash last month. It was the first time elephant calves have been born at the zoo in its 95-year history.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from the members of KVPR. Join at $8 or more per month and access ad-free NPR podcasts through NPR Plus. Give now at kvpr.org/donate.
And now to our main story. Triple digits are finally starting to taper off in the Central Valley after a summer of record-breaking heat. Extreme heat is one of the leading weather-related causes of death in the U.S., resulting in hundreds of fatalities each year. So how are doctors supposed to respond when health is increasingly threatened by a warming climate? San Joaquin Valley native Hina Hundal is a medical student at Stanford University and also a climate advocate. The last couple of years, she's been a delegate to the United Nations Climate Change Conference. Hundal says that as environmental issues become more drastic, so do their impacts on our health. As a medical student, she's working with professors on this topic and says becoming a climate-conscious physician is not a trend, but a movement within the medical community, one needed in places like the Valley. She spoke with KVPR's Elizabeth Arkalian and described how extreme weather in the Valley informed her interest in environmental health issues.
What's really unique about the Central Valley is that we have a lot of vulnerable populations. We have some low-income communities, we have a lot of farm workers, and these populations can often be more prone to extreme heat, poor air quality, water scarcity, and the health impacts of those things. So we have to be thinking about how these environmental stressors can affect both acute and chronic health conditions. And I think being from the Valley, kind of being from an agricultural family and community, you feel this intimate connection with the land. And I think that's really informed my sort of environmentalist standpoint. I think also one of the ways that I really got into thinking about climate change and health impacts actually occurred back in 2021 when there was a heat wave. And I was actually on campus and there happened to be a power outage. Now, I was pretty lucky because the university, having the resources that it did, quickly mobilized. It set up a cooling center that we could go to of course, cool off, but also recharge our phones. They had refrigerators available for people, who needed to refrigerate certain items, such as medications, or mothers who needed to refrigerate breast milk. But if you think about the larger population, these types of resources are not often available in the midst of a heat wave. And certainly in the Central Valley, there are many communities that don't have access to these types of things. And so when we see the ways that heat waves imbricate with power outages, it can be a really dangerous situation. And I personally feel that the medical community has a great role to play here in terms of not only researching the health impacts of climate change, but also being advocates for our patients, both inside and outside the clinic.
I think climate change can also be scary to people. It can feel like something they don't have control over, like the weather. Are there things that you can pinpoint that people can do to protect their well-being, or is this really more incumbent upon our governmental leaders to be taking a stand and making changes to keep us safe?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and it's kind of a both and. One thing you touched upon there, feeling very scared about climate change, there's actually a lot of literature and really interesting work now being done on the concept of climate distress, which encompasses anxiety and grief about how climate change is adversely impacting people and the planet. And I think the important thing is to actually focus on action, because that's a way that we can overcome kind of the stultifying effects of climate distress, where we feel like the world is changing and there's nothing we can do about it. That's not a very helpful stance to take. And so I think both individual action and, of course, at a broader governmental and policy level is the key. And so, if we talk about a heat wave, for example, there are many actions that individuals can take and should take to stay safe. For example, staying hydrated, staying in a cool indoor area, avoiding the sun during peak hours, using sunscreen, of course, not opening the refrigerator, for example, if the power goes out, to try to keep the cool air on your food and medications. But also, I think it's so important to think about what governments and policymakers can actually do. And it's really getting off of fossil fuels that's going to get at the underlying issue, creating climate change. And then also thinking about what can we do for the individuals in our community for whom resources are more limited. As I mentioned, in the Central Valley, we have a lot of farm workers. And of course, working outside during a heat wave can be so detrimental to health. So thinking about whether we have the policies in place to actually protect workers who have to unfortunately be outside during heat waves because of their jobs and their livelihoods.
In the op-ed you wrote where you mentioned that power outage at Stanford, you'd written, and I'll quote you, that the overlapping threats of extreme heat and power outages expose the ways our state is unevenly and inadequately prepared to keep residents safe. You wrote that in 2022. This topic has been front of mind a lot since then. Have there been any changes at the state level or even at the federal level that you think are promising, or how fast of a pace can we expect to see things change, or is this going to be kind of the battle of our generation, so to speak?
I think it'll certainly be the battle of our generation because we have a lot of work to do. But we've seen, for example, progress like the Inflation Reduction Act, putting billions of dollars toward fighting climate change. In our own state of California, Governor Newsom has been a very climate forward leader, putting a lot of money towards that problem. But it's also not just about the money. It's really about educating people and making sure that, for example, during extreme weather disasters, do people actually have the resources, right? So I mentioned the cooling centers, for example, that my university, Stanford, was able to set up when we had a heat wave. That's not something that's, often widely available or widely utilized or widely accessible in the Central Valley. There's also an issue of appointing government officials whose sole job is to actually deal with this problem. We've seen cities around the world like Santiago, Chile, Freetown, Liberia, Miami, and Los Angeles actually appoint chief heat officers. And their whole role is to look at local protocols and figure out where are the gaps. And so I think it'll certainly continue to be the fight of my generation, but we've made progress, but we certainly shouldn't rest on our laurels.
That was Hannah Hundal speaking with KVPR's Elizabeth Arkalian. Hundal is a Valley native studying medicine at Stanford University. In a few months, Hundal will be in Baku, Azerbaijan, to attend the UN Climate Change Conference for the 4th time. And that's today's show. Thanks for listening. If you have feedback or a story idea, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@kvpr.org. Today's episode was produced by me, Jonathan Linden, and KVPR, with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.